Crime Alley is literally in every single Arkham game, except the mobile ones. Today, we're gonna take a look at every iteration of this infamous back alley in the series and compare all of them to determine which one deserves the top ranking. Starting with Arkham Asylum, because this game takes place on an island and not in Gotham City, its version of Crime Alley is limited to being a challenge map. But that's not a bad thing, and actually, the more you think about it, the more interesting it gets. If you're a super duper Arkham fan, then me saying it's limited to being a challenge map should ring your bells, because it also shows up during the second Scarecrow section in the Arkham Mansion. And no, this doesn't mean I lied, it just means I was too lazy to rewrite that part of the script after remembering. Let's first examine the fear toxin induced version of Crime Alley, and then we'll take a look at the challenge map. The encounter begins in this hallway outside the library. As you walk a little further and turn the corner, you're greeted with the world's longest hallway. Now from here, it seems like it goes on into infinity, but in reality, it's just a corridor with a dead end, and they even removed the door that would be here normally. Okay, let's get back to Batman. As you keep walking, the hallway begins to change with every flash. Tables and newspapers start moving around, and then And then the hallway begins to transform into an alleyway. Rain pours down as memories of the last moments Bruce Wayne had with his parents are audibly relived. The first gunshot rings out, trash cans react, and the second forces Batman to react, bringing him down to his parents. The final flash transforms him back into the child he was on that night. We're forced to watch him as he cries over the lifeless bodies of his dead father and his dead mother. Which brings us to this video sponsor. Crime Alley itself in this game has a very gritty and dingy vibe, and I think it might be one of the best environments in the game. All the rain really brings the whole place together, and all the posters plastered on the outside of the apartments, along with the rest of the trash and the rays from the light poles, really make this setting stand out compared to everything else in this game. As I mentioned in my video ranking every combat map, Crime Alley in Arkham Asylum technically gives you a sneak peek into Arkham City. Even if it looks completely different in both games, you can tell the grittiness and detail seen here was definitely brought over into Arkham City's map design. If you keep going all the way to this end, it's nothing but a black void, and of course this end fades back into the Arkham Mansion, and this door is where you'll obviously continue the Scarecrow encounter. Most of what was said can be carried over to the combat map version, but not everything. I don't think this one is as cool, and I think that's because we'll just call it the Scarecrow version. I think that one was trying to be more of how Bruce saw Crime Alley in his head as a kid that night, so that's why it has a darker tone and is all around much more creepy. But the combat map version is supposed to be more of an objective look at how Crime Alley really was. So besides the police cars and ambulance, which indicate that it does take place that night, you can see the actual sky this time, and it's just overall brighter than the other one. Moving on to Arkham City's Crime Alley, the most obvious thing about this one is how different it is from Arkham Asylum's. It's not some long stretched out alleyway, but rather a very small section in between a few buildings. It's right behind the famous Monarch Theater in Park Row, and as we go past the entrance steps to enter the main section is where the best part of this game's Crime Alley comes into play. The white chalk outline of Bruce's dead parents is on full display, being lit up by the spotlight for anyone to come across, even the criminals of Arkham City. With that in mind, it's actually pretty surprising this hasn't been defaced or something. I guess even the scum of Gotham, as Quincy Sharp would say, have respect for the Waynes. As you get closer, the sounds of the prison fade away as the echo of the Waynes walking through the alley, followed by gunshots, can be heard. On one side is a bouquet of flowers placed down by Hugo Strange with a note reading, "It will end where it began." There's also an audio tape he placed down which gives you one of his yap sessions. As I said earlier, this one, like Asylum's, has that grittiness that made that one so great in my opinion. Graffiti covers the exterior walls of these old buildings, which still have occupants since the HVAC units are seen to be working, with all the smoke adding an extra layer of immersion. This back alley used to have some amount of traffic before this hardware store was shut down and the former occupants kicked out once Arkham City was approved to be constructed. The street level wasn't the only part given effort in terms of details. Looking up will also present you with some cool stuff, most notably the various statues of what I'm assuming to be angels. A couple of these structural pieces, which I'm not entirely sure what to call, make a return from Asylum. Although they don't look the same, it's a similar concept with having having something going across and connecting two buildings. I guess you could just call it like an archway or something. I think this one is to help with the structural integrity of the prison wall, but then I'm not sure what this one is for because it's not connected to the wall and also shows up in Arkham Origins, which is obviously before Arkham City was built. There are a few other things that show up again in Origins that I want to bring up, so we're gonna go ahead and switch over to that one. And while we're at it, why not like the video? Why not? Crime Alley in Origins is the most similar to Arkham City's, which makes sense since half the game's map is copy and pasted from City with a few differences here and there. But also similar to Asylum, there are two versions of Crime Alley in Origins. First, we'll look at the real version, so to speak. As expected, it's Monarch Theater's backyard, and the entrance with the steps and painted over sign is all the same, besides the nice gate that would be removed at some point in the future and replaced with this crappy fence. The biggest difference in this section are these pipes that run along the buildings. These weren't in City, but to a certain extent were added in Arkham Shadow. Things will actually get pretty interesting with that game. And as we enter the main section, the proportions are identical and the layout is mostly the same, with a few new objects placed around, such as different dumpsters and this vent that's only here to play a role during one of the case file investigations where you have to solve a double homicide that happens here, which hits way too close to home for Batman. When he actually catches the suspect, we see him get the closest he probably ever gets to purposely killing someone in the series. Weirdly enough, the white chalk outline of Thomas and Martha are here, which I think kind of messes up the idea of Hugo Strange adding it here to mess with Batman and City. Now, we all know continuity in this series isn't something to take all that seriously, but as someone who can't help himself, I gotta at least try to make sense of every little piece of information. So I guess my theory would be that in order to honor the memory of the Waynes on the anniversary of, or at least around the time of their deaths, the outline is painted in Crime Alley and probably sits there until the rain washes it away, which makes me think they were killed sometime in the winter, which would explain why it's in this game and Arkham City. They take place in December and January respectively. It would also explain why the outline isn't in Arkham Shadow, which takes place the July after Origins, or in Night, which takes place on Halloween. And I know the Arkham Wiki says they were killed in June, but I think they just got that from a comic and not from something within the Arkhamverse. And to square up the Hugo Strange thing, after Arkham City's construction was approved and all the residents of the area evicted, there wouldn't be anyone coming around to paint the outline in. Therefore, Batman wouldn't be expecting to see it once he arrives, which means Hugo Strange can do a little trolling.
We do a little trolling.
Now, get ready for my next theory.
Quiet.
Besides the pipes, vent, and outline, the hardware store is also here, and this is before they had to shut down the business, even though it seems that we're catching the tail end of this store's life as they have to do a crazy 80% off sale since they lost their lease, on top of the Christmas sale they got going on, unless it's really two sales in one. Unfortunately, the hardware store isn't the only business in Park Row having financial issues, as the comic shop down the road is also having a 2-in-1 Christmas and liquidation sale. Another piece of lore the store, bars, gives us is that there was an evacuation, or at least a planned evacuation of the city. Always thought there was only the curfew that gets mentioned in the game, but I guess not. On this wall with the Hell's Gate dumpster, there's some new, or technically old graffiti since this game's a prequel, and the garage door is slightly open with a car that's still on. Higher up, the angelic statues were around at this time, and whoever lived in that apartment was really in the Christmas spirit. The biggest thing missing in the upper regions is the spotlight on the fire escape that shined over the outline. Okay, that's the quote-unquote real Crime Alley. Now onto the other version. It shows up after you save the Joker from skydiving off the Royal Hotel after Bane RPGs the roof. The game gets into its flashback mood and has you play as Red Hood Joker. Then as Batman heads back to the Batcave, he relives the moment he saves the clown, and then has to contend with why he even decided to save that lunatic. The game gives us the answer by taking us back to the night that made Crime Alley famous, clearly taking heavy inspiration from Arkham Asylum's second Scarecrow encounter. The cave transforms into the alley as you continue to walk through it, though the first transformation doesn't seem to be the area of the alley, but more so a general area of Gotham. And I think this is probably to ease the player into the whole thing, instead of just immediately showing you Joe Chill's double kill. The next sudden flash is when the realness begins. The cave basically fully transforms into the alley, and this is definitely just City's alley before the designers change up everything that they changed for the overworld version. Almost everything matches up besides the placement of the sign and the ground textures, and for some reason there's like half a back computer in front of the hardware store, along with a bunch of wires connected to the storefront. The next flash puts you right in front of that fateful moment. Chill has the family at gunpoint. Hands go up, a scared Bruce looks around not knowing what's going to happen until...
Why do you do what you do?
Arkham Knight is where things get a bit twisted, literally. But before I show you that, I thought it would be funny to go to Crime Alley in the actual overworld map of the game. So I flew over to Arkham City and went to where the alley would be. At least I think I got the correct spot. And as you can see, it's obviously really low poly since you weren't actually supposed to ever see this in the game. Okay, so the alley is a challenge map like it was back in Asylum. So we'll take a look at that, then move on to the next iteration. Although during the game story towards the end, you do get driven in a van to the alley and have to fight 1,000 Jokers, but there really aren't any notable differences compared to the combat map. The only thing that actually makes a difference is the crashed truck in the story version that isn't in the challenge map. As I said, things get literally twisted here, as the hardware store is on the opposite side of the alley, and in its place is Monarch Theater's back door. I can prove this because if you've been paying attention, then you would have taken note of the store's placement compared to the garage and dumpster. And what is with Monarch Theater's door anyways? It's pretty weird that they added this in, along with this fence blocking the garage, and the placement of the Crime Alley sign is completely wrong. It shouldn't be in this section. The Monarch Theater sign was placed in the alley itself, which is another change, and the two angels on this building are gone, but the one over here was kept in. And for some reason, these weird nutcracker dudes are just standing on some of the rooftops looking over everything. And I can't forget about the newspapers about the aftermath of the Arkham City incident. Now, all these weird changes and discrepancies aren't necessarily a break within the continuity, as they can easily be explained away by the fact that Batman is on fear toxin during the part where the van drops you off here in the story. Clearly the toxin is to some degree affecting the way Batman perceives the alley, which is why the hardware store gets these fancy double doors on top of everything else I mentioned earlier, and us getting to see the Wayne's bodies here with the correct death positions, unlike the flashback in Origins. With our last two games, I'm not gonna try to come up with any theories or anything to explain away the continuity issues. I lied. Arkham VR is just a nightmare, so of course things aren't going to be accurate to quote-unquote reality. In fact, the Crime Alley scene here is technically a nightmare within a nightmare, so that equals double the differences. This one seems to be much more in line with Asylum's, with it being a long alleyway. Finally, the last game we'll take a look at is of course Arkham Shadow. Things get a bit weird with this one. As you go up the steps, there's just this wall here, and when you break it, there's a bunch of crap piled up, and I'm pretty sure all this stuff was done by the rat cult for whatever reason. But what they couldn't have done is build this archway right here once you crawl under all the junk. Once you break the second wall, you can see this huge pipe here that is new to the alley as we know it. Even the pipes Origins had running across the buildings aren't here, even though this only takes place months after that. And for whatever reason, these weird drains and yellow lines were added on the ground. It gets really narrow once you start getting into the main section, and past this open gate, you can see a pipe similar to the ones in Origins, but still a bit different. And before we start talking about the layout, let me bring attention to the Wayne Memorial that's unique to this game. Alright, so the hardware store is in the correct spot, but there does seem to be a back door for the theater, even though there wasn't back during Christmas. The two angels come back, and even the spotlight from City after being left out in Origins, although it is in a different spot on the building and not on the actual fire escape this time. For whatever reason, the proportions of some things are way off. You should be able to see the garage if you stand in this spot, but you can't. You have to walk around the corner to see it, and once you do, it's wider than it's supposed to be. Some pretty weird changes if you ask me, but at least the spire on Wonder Tower is correct, unlike in Arkham Knight. And with that, I'm going to conclude the examination of the various crime alleys in the Arkham games and move on to ranking each of them. Last place isn't hard to pick. I'll definitely give that spot to Arkham VR. We really don't get to see much of it, and really, that's all I have to say about it. The next spot is a bit of a toss-up for me between Shadow and Origins, but I think I'm gonna have to go with Arkham Shadow on this one. I do think this game is a little bit more cartoony and clean looking, so it misses that grittiness that I think makes the other versions so appealing. And I just really don't like the yellow lines and drains they added in, which you can get an even clearer look at in the dream sequences that I didn't bring up earlier. Origins gets 4th place. All the snow really makes me miss Christmas, and the flashback scene is really well done, but what's missing from this one and the one in 3rd place is that feeling of dread but also importance that Arkham City has. Third place is gonna go to Arkham Knight. The colors here really do the heavy lifting, and since obviously the graphics are leagues better ahead of the others, it's really cool being in this location trying to get cinematic shots. But second place is definitely going to Arkham City. There's something about the atmosphere in this one that makes this place so creepy to be in. The soundscape changing once you get close to the outline really adds to this feeling, along with the spotlight shining down on it the entire time, emphasizing a dark past. Going into this video, I wasn't expecting this to be the case, but the top spot is going to Arkham Asylum. I think this one does the atmosphere and vibe the best, even though I wouldn't agree with the general statement that Asylum has the best atmosphere. I think in this case, that is definitely true though. Alright, let me know your thoughts about everything down in the comments, and if you want to see more videos comparing locations or other things in every Arkham game, please let me know and like the video and press the bell after you capes on the subscribe button, okay? Bye.